The Tennis Gambling Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Market Fantasy. Get up to 1K in deposit match with Market Fantasy with the promo code SGPN. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It is currently Sunday night, July 20th, around 9:20 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm your host, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Officially back after about a week off. I was in Florida. Unfortunately, I was planning on recording a couple episodes in the last few days, but the hotel Wi-Fi was not good enough, so instead I had to pull the plug on that. Instead, we're just going to simply wait it out for the start of the next week and the start of the next few tournaments. So here we are, officially back in New York, and we officially have good Wi-Fi again. So I'm here to break down the three events taking place this week in Kitzbuhel, Umag, and in DC. So before we get into the actual breakdown of the three events taking place over the next week, a reminder, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe on YouTube, and a reminder, you also leave a rating and a review on Spotify or Apple. So podcast available on either YouTube for the video component, or you can find the audio only on Spotify or Apple. Points of the podcast still available in a couple of different ways. So check it out however you prefer it. And a reminder, you could always leave some actual feedback with a like and subscribe on YouTube and leaving a rating and a review on Spotify and Apple. Plus, a reminder, check out the merch store on the SGPN website. We have a lot of great tennis stuff. We have shirts, sweatshirts, and mugs. High quality, very affordable. Recommend getting yourself something there. Plus, a reminder, you'd always check out the SGPN app, free to download, and we also have all of our picks and podcasts there, absolutely free. So check out the free SGPN app on the app stores to get all of the SGPN picks and props. Now, a reminder that you could always, hopefully, once again, enjoy the outright picks as well for the tournaments and the actual match previews for the other rounds. But either way, we're here to once again break down some events. So we're going to break down the actual quarters that we have for Kitzbuhel. That's all we got. Unfortunately, I didn't see quarter odds on any other event. But we're going to break down Kitzbuhel for quarters, etc. Then we'll get into the outrights for Umag and the outrights for DC. But I only have quarters for Kitzbuhel, so keep that in mind. Now, for the actual recap of what happened last week, starting off with the recap of the lock and dog from the preview episode last time out, we ended up sweeping, as we ended up winning the 2 3-set marathons that we actually had action in. We had Elias Emer on the money line at minus 140 in the lock section, as that won at minus 140. Once again, it was not exactly the most sweat-free win, but it felt like he was in control in the entire third set. Boyer kind of fell apart, and Emer did win in 3. For the dog, nice win as we had Sarundel money line at plus 125 against Struff. Went to 3 sets. Serrano got the job done and eventually was able to make it all the way to the final before losing to Bublik, but still, point of Sarundel got the job done for us. A nice lock and dog sweep in a collection of 3-set matches. So either way, hopefully, we end up sweeping once again here in this episode for the preview of the matches as well for Kitzbuhel, Umag, and for DC. Now, for the actual fast forward button to get into the ending of those events last week, a couple of interesting winners. You saw Shapo win in Los Cabos, saw Darderi win in Bustad, and you saw Bublik win in Gustad. Bublik looked great the entire week. He only dropped 1 set, which was in the final, to Sarundelo. Felt like he was never really, I would say he was never really in serious trouble throughout the entire actual event. Bublik only dropped 1 set. He was serving extremely well, and then eventually when Sarundelo did end up winning a set, Bublik was able to just respond and win the third set. So I felt like once again Bublik was in control. Decent favorite for the final as well, and got the job done there in straight sets. Darderi was a bit more interesting, but either way, point is he ended up having a nice first set comeback there against De Jong. Trailed 3-0, won the first set, eventually lost second set, but then won the third one easily as he eventually did win another title this year, his second on clay in 2025, including Marrakech. So nice win there for Darderi. And then for the actual Shapo win, he looked great, simply put. You're looking at Shapo, who was really controlled the entire tournament, and he ended up having a pretty easy draw by the end of it because you ended up seeing Kovacevic, who ended up beating Rublev. So you got the main guy out, and once that happened, Shapo kind of coasted the finish line. But either way, the only match that ended in straight sets on Sunday was the Shapo match. The other two went to 3. But nice job by Shapo, Darderi, and Bublik winning titles. And once again, to get into a bit more detail for the recap, felt like for the sake of the show, it felt like we had a chance to actually have a great week. I know that we ended up sweeping the lock and dog picks for the last episode. Could have been a monster episode because we had a couple of serious long shots who made it into the final, as we ended up having De Jong at around 20-1, who made it to the final in Bustad, and then we also had Kovacevic at 25-1, who made the final in Los Cabos. So if either one of them wins, that's a massive outright score for us. Both of them win, of course, that's just an all-time week. Instead, we got none, as both those guys lost. Kovacevic really didn't have a chance. Chapo jumped him early and often, and the match was over pretty quickly. De Jong really punted away that first set. He was up 3-0. Then he eventually lost 6 of the last 7 games. That one was a bit more frustrating, but the point is we had a couple of long shots who made it to the finale on Sunday, and unfortunately, both of our guys fell short. So that's a bit unlike, I don't want to say unlucky. It was just a bit, I'd say, unfortunate for us. But either way, point is you had a couple of fun events, a couple of fun finals, and we'll see if the 3 events taking place over the next week can live up to the same amount of hype that we saw over the past few days. Checking out the actual comment section, though, I do see Johnson back, I see Tubbs back, I see Caetano back, and I see Wipeout back. I do see, just in general, once again, Cayetano mentioning that the Zhang loss kind of sucked. Yeah, you're not wrong. That is what it is. He had a chance to maybe get the break back midway through that third set. He had a low 30 game, and then he immediately just did not convert. So that was pretty unfortunate. But either way, no regrets on the reads. I know we didn't win any of the outrights, but we had 2 long shots into the final. It is what it is. But either way, point is we'll try to do a better job here at the outrights for the 3 events over the next week. Anyway, time to move on into the actual breakdown of the 3 events for the following week in Kitzbuhel, in Umag, and in DC for the DC Open. Now, starting off with Kitzbuhel, for this one, this is going to be an interesting one because we saw Berrettini win last year. He is not available. You have seen a couple of interesting matchups for the final over the years. Berrettini, though, is against Gaston in the final last year as he won, I believe, in straight sets. Baez beat Team in straight sets as well, I believe. You saw Gut beat Misolic, and you saw Rude beat Martinez. Now, for the actual event itself, the field this year is pretty, I don't want to say it's weak, but I would say that it's pretty interesting because it feels like you have one guy who's in great form. The rest are kind of up for grabs, and we'll go from there. So, for starters, mentioned in the odds for the first quarter, we do have quarter odds for the event. We have Bublik, who is off a title. We'll see if he shows up for this event. He might. It wouldn't actually shock me if he did. This isn't like him winning in Halle, where he immediately had to turn around and play the week after, where we knew he'd have no chance of playing. The point is, it does feel like for an actual schedule spot, it could be a tournament where Bublik actually plays, and we'll see if he deals with the fatigue or not, or if he's able to potentially overcome it and win another event, or C, he drops out and all the bets on him void. But for the first quarter, he's a decent favorite, minus 138. You have Fuchsovics at 450, Shevchenko at 7-1. You saw Tarante at 750, Galan at 11-1, Faria at 14-1, and you have a long shot at 18-1 who has no chance. So for Bublik, mentioning the path, let's assume for a second that Bublik does not drop out of the event. Overall, not a bad draw. I mean, it's a pretty weak quarter. The second best player in it is Fuchsovics, who's not really done much on clay recently. But you're looking at the overall field itself. He has a bye, then Faria or Tarante. Probably should be Tarante. You have Shevchenko and Galan. I know Shevchenko beat Warenka on clay last week. Not exactly a great clay player in general. If Fuchsovics, we know, can have some fitness issues. He's been fine, but Bublik would be a favorite over them as well. So Bublik, I think, makes the most sense here at around minus 138. I get it. The argument is you're looking at a guy who's in great form, a guy who I do think can be very, very dangerous to deal with. And the fact is, when the server's on, it can be very tough to break him. And we saw that all week in the last event that he was in Gstaad. I'll go Bublik at minus 138. I do think if he drops out, it's fine because you get your money back. But I do think with the actual bye in the first round, some extra time to recover from winning in Gstaad and then to potentially reset his focus to Kitzbuhel. Give me Bublik at minus 138. Now, the point is, though, for the other options in the first quarter, Fuchsovics that's at a 450, which makes sense. However, he's really not been in great form recently. So the question is, do I want to go with anybody else? And I think I have to take somebody else because there is a chance Bublik drops out. And if that happens, I can potentially get a very favorable draw early on if Bublik does end up deciding to skip the event. So I'll go with Tarante for this one. I think that Tarante is a pretty solid overall player. I do think that he's a good, mostly a clay challenger guy, but still. The point is he can be very dangerous, and I do think at 750, it's a good price. I do think if you're looking at Bublik being at full strength, Bublik would beat him in a second round matchup, but Faria's been really bad. Tarante's been good on the challenger circuit on clay. I do think he should win that first round matchup. I think he's like minus 175 in the first round, but Tarante I think has some value at a 750, especially if Bublik does potentially drop out, and you might get a lucky loser in the second round of the event. I think the potential, I'd say, golden draw for him is worth the long shot price, in my opinion. Give me Tarante at a 750 as my long shot for the first quarter. Moving on to the second quarter, this is going to be the Agut quarter at plus 162. You have Jari at 4-1, who we saw make a good run in Wimbledon. He has not played since, though. Etcheverry's at 4-1, who's been quite bad lately. Misilic had a pretty good overall showing last week. Couple of marathon matches before eventually losing in the later stages of the event. You have Seaboth Wild at 8-1. You have Dzanchop at 9-1, and you have Engel at 18-1. Now, I mentioned before, Agut has some history at the event. Agut actually won the title here a couple years ago, beating Misilic in the final. So you might see maybe a potential rematch of the final from a couple years ago, because Agut and Misilic are in the same quarter. Now, he has a bye in the first round, which I do like. See both Wild or Engel in the second round. Probably see both Wild, but Engel's been okay in Challenger Clay events recently. And for the other side, Etcheverry's been quite bad lately. Misilic has been up and down in terms of form. Even when he won the matches last week, he was having to come from behind a lot, and I do think that he can be very volatile based on his, I'd say, streaky play. So based on that, I'm not sold to Misilic here. I understand that it's going to be in Austria. I get that does support the home crowd angle, but I don't think his form's actually consistent enough for me to trust him in the spot. I'll pass on him. The question is for Jari, do I think he figured out how to play tennis again in Wimbledon, or do I think that was grass and now he's going to struggle again because he's transitioning back to clay? You know what? I think I'm going to go pretty chalky here. I am going to go Agut at 162. I like the buy. I like the fact that he's won here before. I've said before the issue for him can be playing on back-to-back days because he's older, but I do think the draw itself is not that bad. And when you're going to be grouping the Dzanchop, Jari, Misilic, and Etcheverry in the bottom half of the quarter, that's a lot of carnage. And I do think Agut can potentially get by unscathed against either Seaboth Wild or Engel and face off against a compromise opponent in the quarters. Give me Agut for the, I'd say, ease of his path compared to the bottom section of the quarter. I'll take him at 162 for the former champion in this one, but I'm not going to take Agut by himself because I do think that the, I'd say, struggles on back-to-back days could be a problem as the event goes on. I am going to go Jari at 4-1. Maybe I've been swayed by how just well he played in Wimbledon, but I do think the serve can do damage here, and I do think the Dzanchop, can be very, very streaky. He lost that marathon to, I believe it was Ugo Carabelli last week. But the point is, I do think you're looking at Jari, whose serve looked very good in Wimbledon. We know that the forehand can be dangerous, and I do think with the actual conditions here in Kitzbuhel, Jari can potentially make a name for himself throughout the entire bracket. I do think that for a guy who's been successful on clay in the past, not so much this year, I do think he might have been able to find his form. I don't want to make an exact comp to a guy that we're going to talk about in a second for one of the events in Struff, because Struff has had a pretty interesting season where he was really bad in the first half. Then he had an okay showing in Wimbledon, etc. Took a set off Alcaraz, and now went to qualifying in this event in Kitzbühel. We saw him take Sarundalo to 3 sets, who inevitably was the runner-up of the event. Point is, maybe just need an actual event, regardless of surface, just get your actual confidence back. And I think that Jari might have been able to use that qualifying run, the deep run into Wimbledon, to maybe get some confidence back. I'll go with Jari at 4-1. I think he can potentially do enough to get the job done here in this quarter at this price. Moving on, by the way, quickly checking out the comments section here. I see Sashi stopping by, looking at everybody else here. Thinking about the Jar Redemption tournament, you're not, because Sashi, I just said the same thing. So we're on the same page apparently here. Dzanchop can be annoying, and I know that he tends to get up for, I'd say, big matches we saw against Alcaraz, etc. He's still not a guy I trust, and on clay, I think he's fine. But I do think Jari, I know he hasn't played on clay in a while. That serve can be very difficult to return. Dzanchulp has a lot of unforced error issues, similar to Jari. I think he's the better player compared to Dzanchulp, so I don't mind him getting past the first round and going from that point forward. But Tosh is mentioning 4-1. I agree. And the serve can go well at altitude, and I do think he can perform well here. So I'm going to go with Jari as my second choice for this quarter. Adam, this is going to be the Kitzbuhel event in Austria. So that's going to be the event we talk about first. Then we have Umag. Then we have DC, which is the only hardcourt event of the week. Anyway, time to move on into the third quarter here. This one could be arguably the most open quarter in the entire event because you have Comasanya as the favorite at plus 175. You have Martinez at 260. Offner at 3-1. Struff at 7-1. You have Kaza at 8-1 off a very good run last week. Did lose to Bublik in the semis in Gstaad. No shame in that. Bublik was destroying everybody. But Kaza made a good run. We'll see if he turns around, I'd say physically, and it'll look sharp once again here in Kitzbühel. Booz, though, similar story, who made a very good run last week. Now he's back. We'll see if he has anything left in the tank. And Boyer, who I faded in the last episode because he's really bad on clay this season, and he's at plus 2,000. So Komasan is a guy I like. However, the problem is he's never won an ATP title before, and he's plus 175 to win the quarter. So he's getting a lot of respect here, which I understand. The draw itself is favorable. Now, Boyer is in the first round, who I just roasted a second ago, who's not been good on clay for the entire season. Kaza and Booz got special exemptions, but they both played a decent amount of tennis last week. We'll see if fatigue plays a factor. So Komasanya actually like the immediate draw for, and I think that 175 sounds a bit right to me. I understand that he's a guy who has still not proven much per se on his actual ATP resume. But I do think for the draw itself, it's favorable. I think Boyer's going to lose to him in the first round. Kaza or Booz might kill each other. And you might see once again Komasanya get a potentially fatigued opponent in the second round. Martinez, though, is the seeded player with the bye in the section. I don't know if he's healthy. He was supposed to play last week after the injury we saw in Wimbledon where he couldn't serve against Sinner, and he skipped it. So I don't know if Martinez can actually play in the event. And if that ends up resulting in him missing a potential tournament here, there's no value on Martinez. I think even if he plays, I question how healthy he's going to be. The draws are not that great either. I'll mention that in a second. But I'm going to skip, once again, Martinez. I'm going to skip him entirely in the section. So I'll go with Komasanya at plus 175. But I am going to take a spin with a guy who actually went through qualifying and a guy who actually gave Sarundel a run for his money in the event last week. I am going to go with Struff at 7-1. Same reasons why I like Jari in the event. Altitude, good server, and the fact is he did actually look pretty good for decent portions of that Sarundel matchup. Unfortunately, though, he fell apart a couple times on big points, but still, I think 7-1 is a good price. Struff has a decent matchup in the first round, not exactly great, as Offner beat him in the French Open this year. But Offner's been a pretty, I'd say, volatile guy in his career. Struff maybe gets revenge here in altitude. Think he'll look sharp because he's been playing better tennis over the last few weeks. But the point is, if Martinez does drop out, that's a really golden opportunity for Struff or Offner to get by into the quarterfinals. So looking at the actual price differential, I think the price is too good on Struff to pass up on. By comparison, Offner is 3-1, and I can get 7-1 on Struff. So even if you like Offner, that price feels too cheap. I think Struff should be closer to 5-1 in my opinion. So instead, give me Struff at 7-1 as my second choice for the third quarter in Kitzbühel. Moving on to the final quarter, this is the Baez quarter at minus 110. For the other options, you have Hanfmann at 5-1. You have Gaston at 550. You have Rinderknecht at 6-1. You have Gombos at 11-1. Bagnus at 11-1. And Neumeier at 16-1. Now, Baez, we know when he's on, is very good on clay. The problem is he's been god-awful for months, and we saw that happen last event, as he probably should have lost his first match. He won, and then Darderi killed him in the second matchup, and we're out to winning the title. So, you could argue that the Baez loss aged well, because Darderi won the event. However, he was not close. He got bageled in the first set, and it looked like it was going to be a very ugly match early on, and it was. So the question is, do I think Baez ends up bouncing back? A reminder, Baez has been successful here in the past. Baez is actually a former champion, as he beat Team here a couple years ago in the final. So I do think for the actual path itself, Baez has a very favorable draw has a bye than Hanfman or Neumeyer. Probably Hanfman, but who knows, went to qualifying. And you have Rinderknech, Bagnes, Gaston, and Gambas on the other end. So I do think Baez, despite not being trustworthy for the entire event, I think minus 110 makes sense. I'll take it for the actual, I'd say, path itself. I'll go with him to win the quarter. But I'm going to go with a long shot to pair with him because I don't trust Baez at all. Instead, give me Bagnes at 11 to 1. We saw him make a clay final, I believe it was last year. And I do think that Bagnes on clay in general is good. He's a crafty lefty, and the fact is, he is a clay specialist. And I do think with him going through qualifying, he can make some noise potentially in this event. The path's not bad. The Rinderknech has been underwhelming on clay this year. And you're looking at Bagnes, who looked good, not dropping a set in qualifying. I think there's some value on a long shot in this quarter. If Baez loses, the quarter blows up. So I think you're looking at what could be a good opportunity to take a long shot. Gaston makes some sense. I don't trust him mentally to put his best foot forward in a match in, match out basis. And I do think that Bagnes is actually kind of live against Rinderknech in the first round. Give me Bagnes at 11 to 1 as my long shot here for the fourth quarter in Kitzbuhel. Time to move on to the actual outrights to win the event. Starting off with the odds to once again be the favorite here, you have Bublik at plus 275. You have Baez at 5 to 1, which is a price I can't take, by the way, because he just has not been good enough. So I can handle Baez to win the quarter. I can't take 5 to 1 on a guy who's been that bad recently to win the event. If he wins, would I be shocked? No, because when Baez is on point, he's a good player. But I do think that 5 to 1 is too cheap. You have Agut at 7 to 1. You have Martinez at 8 to 1, which is very cheap for a guy off an injury. You have Comasagna at 8 to 1, Echeverry at 14 to 1, Misolic at 16 to 1, Jari at 18 to 1, Offner at 20 to 1. You have Fuchsovics at 20 to 1, Struve 20 to 1, Bagnes 20 to 1, which is a crazy price by DraftKings, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. Hanfman is at 25 to 1, Gaston is at 30 to 1, Kaza 30 to 1, Shevchenko 30 to 1, Seaboth Wild 40 to 1. You kind of get the point. So for the favorites, I do think Bublik makes sense. If he drops out, then it voids. And I like the fact he has a bye. And it feels like mentally he's more locked in on a regular basis recently for the last couple of months. So I'll go with Bublik at 295, which I ended up finding. I believe that was on Bet Rivers. I think it's a good price for a guy who we just saw play great clay tennis, drop one set the entire event in Gustad. Think he'll look sharp here with the serves kind of dominating potentially on the courts here. I think Bublik makes sense being the best server in the field. Give me Bublik at plus 295 for his core and form. Now, I'm going to stick with the good serving nature and trend for the next couple guys. I'm going to go with a couple long shots for the event. Bublik's my only favorite. I didn't think the price was warranted for a lot of guys. Baez, I guess, makes sense based on history, but not based on current form. Martinez is injured. Agut is too old. I can't trust him back-to-back days. Comasagna, I like as a player. 8 to 1, despite never winning the ATP title in his career, I think is just a very cheap number. I was hoping for Comasagna at like 11 to 1. 8 to 1 I can't take. That price is too cheap. I've been priced out of that market, so I'll pass on Comasagna for the event. Echeverry has never won a title either. Can't take him at 14 to 1 for current form. But I am going to go with Jari. I think there's some value at 20 to 1. I think the serve we saw look very good in Wimbledon. I think it can look good here as well. Give me Jari at plus 2,000 as my second choice. Similar type player. Give me Struve at 25 to 1 because I think that the serve can be very good here. I do think looking at the actual path again, Offner I know is going to be in Austria, which can be annoying for Struve, but he's been good on, I'd say, clay recently, at least for the last week or two. I know he lost to Cerundolo. Thought he looked decently in that match. And the fact is, you're looking at what could be a good spot for Struve to kind of fly under the radar. And with Martinez being injured, who has a bye, he could drop out. And at that point, Struve has a lucky loser in the second round. I'll go with it for the value. Give me Struve at 25 to 1. But I said a second ago that DraftKings had Bagnes at 20 to 1, which is an insane price because I found 100 to 1 on Bagnes. That was on Bet 365, I believe. 100 to 1 compared to 20 to 1. I'm going to take it. If you want to give me a guy who made a clay final last year, I do think there's some value on Bagnes. Yes, I understand he's not exactly a big server, but he went through qualifying. He looked good. Think the path itself is fine. Rinderknech is a guy who I've not really been high on clay this season. I do think that Bagnes will actually beat Rinderknech in the only head-to-head clay meeting. 100 to 1? Sure. I'll take a shot on that. I mean, looking at the actual favorites here, if Bublik drops out, you have anybody's tournament. Baez has been streaky, Agut's older, Martinez is injured. It could just be a full free-for-all. And at that point, give me 100 to 1. He's the same price as Boyer on DraftKings, which is an insane price in general, but on Bagnus, who's objectively speaking a pretty crafty veteran clay player who's been here before. Give me Bagnus at around, once again, 100 to 1. I think it's a good price. As my super long shot for the event, I like him to win the quarter at 11 to 1. I'll complete the long shot Hail Mary dart throw. Give me Bagnus at 100 to 1 as my super long shot for the event. I see Sashi mentioned in the buy has been in really bad form. I really can't. Hoffman's a guy who I thought about as well. The problem is I might have told myself mentally that I don't really see Hoffman ever winning an ATP title. I don't think he's good enough. Now, this is the type of draw that would work well for him. So I can understand if you want to take the opportunity to potentially consider Hoffman. I'm going to pass, but I get where your head's at, Sashi. I'm just not going to pick him, but if you end up going for him, rooting for you. But anyway, to recap the actual quarters and the outright picks for Kitzbuhel, the quarter picks. First quarter, we're going to go with Bublik at minus 138, and we're going to go with Tarante at 750. Second quarter, we're going to go with the Agut at 162, and we're going to go with Jari at 4 to 1. For the third quarter, we're going to go with Comasanya at 175, and we'll go with Struff at 7 to 1. For the fourth quarter, we're going to go with Baez at minus 110. And we're going to go with Bagnus at 11 to 1. And for the outrights to win the event, Bublik at 295. We'll throw that in as well. Jari at 20 to 1. We have Struff at 25 to 1. And we also have Bagnus at 100 to 1. So that's going to wrap it up for the actual outrights for Kitzbuhel. Time to move on into the preview of Umag. Before getting to Umag, though, reminder, brought to you by our sponsor, which is Circuit Million Circuit Survivor, because they're still hosting the football contest for the upcoming season. $20 million guaranteed prizes. No rake. So the entries go above the guarantee. All the extra money will go to the prize pool. Circuit Million, pick 5 times ATS each week, or go for the ultimate sweat Circuit Survivor. Also, a Circuit Rendismo, a 100K Circuit contest, so keep that in mind. The search is in person at Circuit Sportsbook in Nevada. And when you sign up, you can play from anywhere with the help of SGPN's official proxy. Go to footballcontest.com. Use code SGP to get $50 off your proxy fees. We're also brought to you by Mubadala Citi DC, because they're available in a ton of locations. Use them to bet on baseball, bet on WNBA, bet on golf, bet on football futures, and tennis, of course. Also, you can use it with crypto, fast payouts, you deposit some though. For an account, use code SGPN to get a special 100% of the match up to 1K. Terms and conditions apply. Mubadala Citi DC promo code SGPN. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Game Podcast. Went for the outrights in Kitzbuhel. Time to move on to Umag. A reminder, we have no quarter odds for the next two events, so it should take less time to break down these tournaments. Now, for Umag, for the history, it was a phenomenal final last year. Heartbreaker for us, because we had Musetti winning, and he lost in the final to Cerundolo, but a very, very solid match, if you remember it. Went to a final set breaker, and Cerundolo outlasted him. Now, Papiron ended up beating Wawrinka in the final the year prior. Sinner beat Alcaraz the year before that, and Alcaraz beat Gasquet the year before that. So what you're looking at for Umag, some firepower tends to win here. Now, you don't necessarily need the best serve, but you're looking at Cerundolo, Musetti, Wawrinka, Papiron, Sinner, and Alcaraz, of course. Decent amount of firepower on the wings. So I do think having some firepower can bode well for some players in the event. Now, for the outrights to actually win the event, it could be, I'd say, viewed as an open event because you have Cerundolo here to defend his title at 350, but we know that based on his actual form this season, he's been a short favorite or one of the favorites recently, and he has really never come through this entire season, so I can't take him. I think that 350 is too cheap. I get that he's defending champion. I get that he's a very solid player when he's in form. I can't trust him. I'll pass on him there at plus 350. Now, Dorderi is second favorite at 4 to 1, assuming he plays in the event after winning the title in Bastad. You have Navone at 650. You have Majcik at 11 to 1. De Jong, who lost in the final, of course, in Bastad at 12 to 1. Ugo Carabelli at 12 to 1. De Zoomer at 14 to 1. Lajovic at 14 to 1. Garin at 16 to 1. Prismic, the local youngster in Croatia, is around 16 to 1 as well. Capriva is at 22 to 1. Pizarro 22 to 1. Moeller 25 to 1. Basilashvili 28 to 1. Taberner is at 33 to 1. Wawrinka 33 to 1 as well. Baena 33 to 1. Zepieri 33 to 1, and you kind of get the point. So for the actual event in itself, it's really tough to pick one of the favorites because Cerundolo, I said before, I can't trust at that price. I'm not interested at 350. Darderi, I think, actually has a game that translates well to the courts in Umag, but he just won a title. So I don't really want to pick him on back-to-back weeks to go back-to-back. So I'll pass on Darderi at 4-1. If he did not make the final in Bastad, I probably would have taken him in the event, but woulda, shoulda, coulda doesn't matter. So I'll pass on Darderi here at 4-1 as well. Now, I said before, firepower matters, but I do think being good on clay matters too. And Navone, we know, is very good on clay. Now, Navone is a guy who seems to always have a bad draw because he seems to always end up in Cerundolo's section, and he's once again. Now, we saw Cerundolo beat him in the last event they were in together, but you're looking at Cerundolo, who could potentially lose. We'll see what happens. De Jong should be tired, though. He just beat Barrios Vera in straight sets last week. They play again. So maybe Barrios Vera gets revenge, but I do think for the sake of clay skill, I'll take a swing with Navone at 650. I like Navone. I think he's a good clay player. The serve's not great, but he can really showcase the consistency, and I do think you're looking at a spot where Navone can do some damage. He's a guy that I like backing on clay because he's a good clay player. The draw seems to be always impossible for him. It's not great per se in this event, but I do think Cerundolo can be had, and I do think that Navone at 650 makes sense. For the second quarter, though, you have the Zoomer, you have Wawrinka, you have Kapriva, and you have Green or Drogot. So whoever wins that match between Navone and Cerundolo probably makes the semis, and I do think Navone's price is a bit more appealing than Cerundolo. I'll take Navone at 650. I think that he can do some damage here, and I do think that he's a very good clay player who should be viewed with some respect. So I'll go with him at 650. Now, for the second choice I'm going to go with, I'm skipping Mychik, who's been better recently, I'll admit it, but I don't exactly trust his overall game to win an ATP title at this point, so I'll pass on him there. De Jong might be tired, I'll pass on him too. Carabelli's interesting because he's been good on clay this season. He was good on clay last week. He did lose before the final, so he does have some extra day or two off. And I think that his draw is not bad. Now, looking at the actual path here, he is in the third quarter, has a bye, then Pizarro in the second round, then either Mychik or Lajovic potentially. We'll see. I think Guga Carabelli, though, has proven he's a very dangerous clay player, and you can't really overlook him. He also has some firepower, which I feel like is pretty underrated, but I'll go with him at 12-1. I think his game kind of fits the mold of previous winners. It could be a very open event compared to previous years. I'll take him, though, at 12-1. Think he's earned enough respect for me watching him play this year on clay to take a shot with him at 12-1. Now, for the long shot for the event, I'm going to go back to that second quarter. I'm going to avoid the bottom half. Darderi might play, he might not. Baina has Basilashvili in the first round. Not interested. Prismic is too young. I don't trust him either. He could lose to Muller in the first round as well. So based on that, I'm going to go to the second quarter, which I think is very open because the Zoomer, I know, can be good on clay. He also can be injured at times. We'll see what happens, but I do think you can make an argument that Kapriva, who did win his first round match on Sunday, he's a good clay player. And we've seen him showcase the firepower. I do think that he can be dangerous at 22-1. I like the price. He's been successful on clay this year. He has some firepower from both wings. Do think it's a good price for a long shot. Now, I am projecting a pretty unpredictable event. We have seen some well-known winners with Cerundolo, Papiron, Sinner, Alcaraz, etc. I'm picking a more open event than previous years, but I think the field's weaker than it was in previous years. I believe Tsitsipas, for example, was supposed to be here, but the tournament director has some issues with Ivanisevic, who's his new coach. So Tsitsipas passed. So the point is, I do think you're looking at what could be an open event. I'll take some shots here. For the picks, though, I thought the price was too cheap on Darderi and Cerundolo. I'll pass. Give me Navone at 650 is my favorite. I'm going to go with Ugo Carabelli at 12-1, and I'll go with Navone sorry, not Navone. I'll go with Kapriva as my long shot at 22-1. Once again, I think it's going to be a pretty open event. So if Cerundolo loses and Darderi maybe sits out, you'll see a lot of odds fluctuate. But I am going to go with the actual, once again, options here to kind of cover some quarters, some Armageddon situations, and hopefully we get another long shot into the final for this one. I see a question from Wipeout, though. There's a reason why I don't play each way outright, especially the long shots. To be clear, what exactly you're referring to, Wipeout, for each way? What do you mean by that? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what you're referring to for that actual question. But I do think you can find some value in the event. If you want to go for Cerundolo to defend his title, good luck, but I need a better price at 350. For Cerundolo, I need at least like 6-1 to consider taking him. I can't do it. He's too volatile. He's too streaky, and I do think that his game can easily drop off a cliff one day. We see it all the time with his actual game. So I'll go with some other shots. I'll pass on the favorites, and hopefully we get another long shot into the final here in Umag. Moving on to the next one. We're going to look at the only hardcore event, the most important event of the week, the 500 event in DC. Now, for this one, the recent winners, you have Korda, who beat Kaboli in the match last year, saw Evans beat Greekspor the year prior, saw Kyrgios beat Nishioka the year prior, and you saw Sinner beat McDonald the year before that. So, for DC, there's one common theme here. It is going to be hot as hell outside. So you want to back guys that can handle the heat in these conditions, because in the DC area in the summer, it's pushing 90, and on-court temperature is in triple digits. So you might see some guys who you like, but if they're in serious heat and there's not much shade available, you might see some retirements mid-match, you might see some dropouts in general. You want to make sure your guys are, I'd say, comfortable in the extreme heat, and that has been an issue for some guys in the past. Now, for the actual odds for the event in itself, you have an American as the favorite, as you ended up having Fritz at around, give or take, 350. Shelton at 650. You have Dimonauer at 650 as well. Medvedev is at 7-1. Rune is at 11-1, who now has Agassi, actually, as one of his consultants, I guess. Not officially a coach, but he's one of the consultants who went with Rune to the event. So we'll see if Alcaraz has the magic touch when it comes to fixing Rune's game. Rublev, though, at 15-1. Tiafoe at 18-1. Musetti at 20-1. Leheshka at 20-1 as well. Diallo 20-1. Kaboli 22-1. Fekina 25-1. You have Kimanovic at 28-1. You have Monfils at 28-1. Nori 30-1. Nicholson 30-1. You kind of get the point. So if you want to throw in some long shots, though, you have Papiron at 40-1. Sonego at 50-1. If you want to go Nakashima, 50-1 as well. You kind of get the point. So, for starters, do I think Fritz should be the favorite in the event? Yes. Do I think he should be 350? Maybe it sounds a bit cheap, but I get it. I think Fritz is still a good player. I think he's the best player in the field, and he's good on hard court. Of course, he made the US Open final last year. I get it. I think Fritz makes sense as the favorite. For the actual draw in itself, it's not bad. By then Pericard or Vukic. Reminder, he beat Pericard in 5 sets in Wimbledon. Pericard's been a mess recently, so I think that Fritz should beat him. He has not played a single match since Wimbledon, so we'll see if Pericard's able to make the adjustment to hard court. It's easier for him than others because he has a bomb serve, and that's basically it. But I think Fritz should get by a Pericard or Vukic in that second round. Sonego can be tricky, though. I do think Fritz should win that one, but I do think for the other quarter, or for the other guys in the quarter, Rublev I'm not interested in. I do think that he's just not trustworthy enough. We saw him break down again mentally against Kovacevic in the semis of Los Cabos. I'll pass on Rublev, not interested for the price. And Fekina, I don't know what the hell that was in Los Cabos. He got destroyed, and he no-showed the entire tournament. So I don't know what to expect from Fekina either, but I do think the winner of the Fritz and Sonego match should win that quarter, so keep that in mind. I will go with Fritz at 4-1. I do think at the end of the day, his serve plays well on these courts, and you're looking at a guy who's very good on hard court, a guy who actually does well in the heat compared to what you might think for most Americans at least. Fritz, though, I think has the game and the overall stamina to make a decent run here in DC. So I'll go with Fritz, my first choice here at plus 400. Now for the other options, Shelton, do I trust enough? I'm going to say no. I did not like his draw. Has a bye, then McDonald or qualifier. McDonald made the final a couple years ago. Same immediate section as Diallo, a potential matchup there in the third round. Diallo's good. I think that could be a potential upset match for Shelton. They're in the same quarter as well as Kaboli and Tiafoe. Shelton's quarter is pretty tricky, actually. I don't see that being a straightforward path for Shelton. I see a couple of upset alert potential matches there for Shelton, who can still be very streaky at times. I'm going to pass on Shelton. I don't see any value for that quarter at 650. I'll pass on him there. Now, I do want to point out for Medvedev at 7-1, I'm going to pass on him too, because he's not won a title in about 2 years. We saw him lose immediately in Wimbledon. He's been just an absolute mess mentally, and I can't trust him. And for his actual path, it's not bad. He has Opelka, who actually beat him on grass a couple months ago. But Medvedev has a bye, then Opelka or qualifier, same immediate, I'd say, section as Papirin, same section as Rune, and Mickelson as well. I think Medvedev would beat Mickelson, but if Rune's in form, maybe Medvedev loses to him. But simply put, I can't take that price on Medvedev, who's not won a title in basically 2+ years. I think 7-1 is just a price that's too cheap. There's no value on that. Medvedev can struggle with the heat as well. I think he's a guy who can have a mental breakdown in a match, and I can't trust him at all. So I'll pass on Medvedev, and I do think that he's a guy who I needed at least 10-1 to consider at this point. Especially with this section, I'll pass on him as one of the favorites here for the event. Now, Rune, I'm going to pass on as well at 11-1. I get he maybe can look sharp if Agassi gets to him. I'll believe it when I see it. There's no value at 11-1. I don't trust his fitness. I don't trust his form. I'll pass on him at 11-1. I do think he can kind of find a similar groove that Korda found last year, where I was kind of in a prove to me situation with Korda, where I was letting him try to prove to me that he could get the job done. He still got fortunate, as you might remember. You saw Kokonakis choke against him last year, and you saw Korda ride the extra chance to win the title eventually. But I do think that Rune can maybe find a gear to get it done, but I can't trust him to find that gear, so I'll pass at 11-1. Now, Rublev at 15-1, no chance. After watching him break down against Kovacevic in the semis, I need more than that. I can't take him for that price, 15-1. I'll pass on Rublev for that one. Now, Tiafoe is the fun one, which will result in a rant by me. Tiafoe, this is the event that he gets hyped up for every year, according to people that preview the event, that gamble on, etc. Because Tiafoe is the local kid. Ton of fan support. They're always there to support him. So people will blindly pick Tiafoe under the premise he's going to try, and Tiafoe will find another gear that will help him find a certain form that will eventually result in a title here. I'm going to throw this out there. He's been here, I believe, 8 times in his career. He's made the finals 0 times. Made the semis last year, and he ended up losing to a Korda in the semis. But the point is, Tiafoe gets hyped up for the event every year by people. He never wins. He's never made the final here. Don't take Tiafoe. That's my advice for you. Besides being a head case and just in general, you can never trust in itself. People will invent a narrative that since it's in his backyard, he's going to show up, he's going to try harder, and he'll find a way to win. He never wins. He's never made the final here, and he has Kaboli in the third round. Not a great draw for Tiafoe. Even Kovacevic or Halles in the second round is not exactly a pushover. Kaboli, I think, has been better than him recently, and you're looking at him being in the same section as well as Shelton. That's a miserable draw for Tiafoe. A bye, maybe Kovacevic or Halles, then Kaboli, then Shelton, then Fritz. Yeah, good luck to Tiafoe. I can't take that. So Tiafoe is going to be the sucker play of the week as far as I'm concerned. You're going to see a bunch of other tennis, I'd say, preview podcasts talking about Tiafoe, how he's back in DC. He's going to look great again. Good luck with that. I've made the same rant year after year, and I've been right every time. Stop betting Tiafoe to win this event. He never wins. It's a waste of money. Don't even bother. It's a complete waste of cash. So once again, I'll pass on Tiafoe. I encourage you to do the same. Now, moving on to the other guy that I skipped out of the favorites. I did skip de Minaur. Now, de Minaur had a bit of a hiccup mid-season. He had some burnout issues, and it felt like he was playing too many matches, and he was vocal about it because it felt like he was, stamina-wise, kind of falling apart. Made a decent run in Wimbledon, and I do think that he's a guy who can play well on the courts here. 8-1 I like. I found an 8-1. I'll go with it. Now, his actual draw is really not that bad. Unlike Tiafoe, who has a hell draw in his quarter, it's really not bad for de Minaur, who's in the fourth quarter of the event. Now, this is the Musetti quarter, which is a quarter you want to target, because Musetti, we know, is a clay guy first. He's not a great hardcore player. You might be surprised that he's playing in DC compared to the clay events in Kitzbuhel and compared to Umag, there's more money because it's a 500. So that's why Mussetti's here. He's not a great hardcourt player. I see an opportunity. He's also not played for a while. I do think that he can be had early. I think Nori, in theory, could beat him in the second round. I think that Nakashima could beat him as well. So you might see a potentially open quarter here in the fourth quarter. And I like the Diminauer draw a lot. He has a bye, then Gofen or Boo. We saw Boo choke away, what was it, like 5 match points in his second match in Los Cabos. Gofen has been playing on clay. We saw him lose to Sarundalo in 3 in Gustad. I think that once again, Diminauer can beat both guys easily. Now, Leheshka could be tricky, so I am going to point out Leheshka maybe ends up beating Diminauer, but he has Kekmanovic into the second round, which could be tricky as well. So Diminauer, I think, has a very easy path into the third round. I do think that his game translates well to the courts here in DC. And the fact is, he is Australian, so I know he can handle the heat when needed. 8-1, I like for a price. I do think his quarter is favorable. I think he's in a good spot. Give me Diminauer at 8-1 as my second choice. Now, I decided, just in case there's a bit of chaos, you saw Nishioka make a final here a couple years ago. Quarter was a decent price last year. You have seen a couple of guys actually make good runs. Evans was a serious long shot a couple years ago. Kabuli was a long shot last year, lost in the final. McDonald was a long shot a couple years ago as well. So you have seen maybe one Cinderella make the final. You know what? I'll go with a guy who I think has a pretty interesting draw. Does involve facing Fritz early on, but based on game and based on upside on skill level, I think Sonego is intriguing at around 66-1. I get the path is difficult. You could argue it's a donation. Sonego in Wimbledon looked pretty good. Did lose to Shelton. Again, lose to Shelton in Grand Slams every time. But I do think his game can result in a good long shot opportunity for this price. We took him last year in Winston-Salem. He won the title because we know his game when he's on is very dangerous. And I do think if we're looking at Sonego at this price, he's a guy whose talent suggests this price might be a bit too big, regardless of draw. Do I think he could beat Fritz? Sure. I think he could. Do I think he's going to? No. But I do think the second quarter is very, very, I'd say, cutthroat. And I do think that Sonego or Fritz, whoever wins that matchup, should win the quarter and should win the half, in my opinion. So give me Sonego at this massive price, my long shot. I wanted one long shot. I was interested in the other people. Kaboli, for example, I thought about a 22-1. But with that draw, I can't do it. And you're looking at what's a pretty favorable draw for Sonego before the first matchup, a bye, then Arnaldi or Altmaier, two guys who've really not done much recently. I think Sonego has a pretty favorable path into the third round. If Fritz loses to Pericard, for example, suddenly you have a massive opportunity in that quarter. I'll go with Sonego as my serious long shot here, my only long shot at around 66-1. And that's going to wrap it up for my outright picks for DC. So once again, the outrights here for DC. The first choice is going to be on Fritz at around 4-1. For the second choice, give me Diminauer at around 8-1. For my final choice, give me the super long shot. Give me Sonego at around 6-1 to wrap up the outright portion of the show. Time to move on into the actual lock and dog picks for matches in the events. For into that, the reminder, they're brought to you by our sponsor, which is Underdog Fantasy, because they're doing Best Mania happening all summer long. Give away 15 million in prizes, including 2 million for first place. No waiver wire, no arguments about trades. Best balls, best way to play fantasy football. And a reminder, you can always use Underdog for Pick'em as well. When you sign up there for an account, use the code SGPN to get a special pick-in first time with an offer up to 1K in bonus cash. A fantasy promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Rhythm, because they have a game-changing feature called Power Trends, the best of the best for what the house model has to offer. They are added to the patterns, where they'll give you the best actual props, and they have a high ROI. And a reminder, they're updated every day, according to Rhythm, and you can always use it with their great hit rate so far. MLB Power Trends have a win rate of 63%, ROI of 4.5% of the past 400 bets. WNBA, though, has been great. Power Trends are 35-20 since launch, which is a great ROI of 20.7%. Download the app, check out Power Trends, start betting smarter, and you can also try it for free for a week. But if you have a trial, go to sportsgaming.com/rhythm to get your 7-day free trial. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Game Podcast. Finish going through the outrights for Kitzbuhel, Umag, and DC. Time to move on into the lock and dog picks. For the lock, I'm going to go actually with some deja vu to the last episode. We're going to go back to Boyer as he takes on Komasanya. We're going to go with Komasanya to win in straight sets at minus 140. Now, Komasanya looked pretty good last week. Did make the quarters in Gstaad. We saw him beat Baena and Trungaliti in straight sets. He looked good. He's got firepower. I think his game translates well to the courts here. As for Boyer, like we did last episode, we faded him because he's been awful on clay recently. He had a frosty handshake there against Emer as well. So mentally, he might not be fully locked in right now, and it makes sense when you're looking at his numbers. He's lost 7 of his last 8 clay matches. He's 3-11 on clay this year. Komasanya, I don't trust to win the entire event for his price at around 8-1. But do I think he can win against a guy in bad form on clay in the first round in straight sets? Yes, I think he can. I think Komasanya gets the job done. Give me Komasanya in straight sets at minus 140 as my lock. For my dog, I'm going to go to the matchup between Bagnes and Rinderknech. I alluded to it before. I think Bagnes to win the event at 100-1. I'll take him for the first round, money line at plus 175. Now, Bagnes is a clay specialist. He looked very comfortable in qualifying, did not drop a set. And the fact is, he's more acclimated to the courts here in Kitzbühel because he played the qualifying here. As for Rinderknech, I understand that he's been here in the past. He's been okay in the event in the past, but he had a good grass season for his usual standard. Besides that, though, he's really not done much on clay this season. He's only 5-9 on clay. So I do think even though the courts with the altitude, you could argue, benefit his actual game, we know Rinderknech does hit a ton of errors, and the fact is Bagnes has a pretty interesting, I'd say, style of play behind the baseline. A lot of looping, I'd say, forehands, trying to keep the ball in play. I do think he can kind of rope-a-dope Rinderknech like we saw Cerundolo do to Struff last week. I think you're looking at Bagnes keeping the ball in play, forcing errors. I think Rinderknech mentally might implode over the course of this matchup. But a 5-9 guy on clay who's like minus $2, I think is a massive favorite. Too big, and Bagnes beat him in the only clay meeting in their careers. Beat him in 2023. So the point is, I do think Bagnes has a game that can frustrate Rinderknech. He's done it before. And the fact is, Rinderknech is a guy who I'm not that high on in general. He was great on grass this year. Good for him. Now he's back to clay. I think that if the serve is not firing, he's going to have problems. And I do think that he's a guy who I think will struggle in the long rallies, keeping the ball in play. Bagnes, though, can be difficult. He's crafty. And I do think for this price, I'll take a swing here at 175. So once again, the plays for the lock and dog. The lock's going to be on Komasanya. Straight sets at minus 140 against Boyer. For the dog, give me Bagnes money line at plus 75 against Rinderknech. Going to wrap up for the show. We'll back once again for the quarters in Kitzbühel and Umag. We're going to have to punt DC in the meantime because they play night matches. Takes too long for lines to come out, so we're probably going to have to pass on DC. Apologies there. Apologies again that we had no episodes for the quarters, semis, and the final for last week. The Wi-Fi was really, really bad. There was no chance I was going to be able to actually get a good episode in. It was going to lag the entire time. So apologies, but we're back now. Find me on Twitter